Good morning, everyone. I see some names starting to pop into the chat there. I'll just give a bit of time for everyone to get in. Welcome back. It's nice to have you all here after a while. It's been a little while since our last webinar, but we're delighted to welcome you all here again. I'm joined by my colleague Anthony today here. We're going to cover just an overview of the Great Place to Work process, really, both for organizations that are maybe thinking about kicking off their Great Place to Work journey, and also organizations that have been with us for a while that have a bit of a back to basics approach. Just a quick tech check as we're kicking off. Can we get a few messages in the chat if you can hear me okay? How are we doing, guys? Anyone out there? Hello, great.
There's a bit coming in
through here. Look, I mean, it's a funny time. We're kind of almost getting back to normal, but not quite there yet. There's a long list of things, you know, that still have to be addressed before we're back to normal. But traffic certainly isn't one of them, if the roads have anything to do with it, from my experience this morning. But look, for those of us that are working from home, we don't necessarily have to deal with that just yet. Just a bit of a health check, I suppose, before we kick off the session. For those who aren't going to be able to stick around for the whole session, we will have recording and slides available afterwards, so you can review that if you're not able to stick around for the whole thing. Also do, as I can see you're already doing, make good use of the chat and Q&A function. We'll have a Q&A as we come towards the end of the session, and we have Marina moderating the chat and the Q&A. From my chat with clients at the moment and organizations I've been speaking to, it's becoming clear that that squeeze for talent that previously we may have seen in sort of certain sectors or certain roles is now totally not discriminating. It's all over the shop, not discriminating by size or sector or anything else. We're seeing it everywhere. We're seeing it in hospitality, in retail, in logistics, and supply chains. So really now more than ever, standing out as an employer of choice is going to be absolutely critical, and being recognized as a great and best workplace will hopefully help you attract and retain the talent you need in that tight talent market. So what does it entail? Let's move on to the next slide and just see what the process looks like. So this is a very simple outline of the Great Place to Work journey. The initial step will be to select a 2-week window, which we will administer the Trust Index employee survey to all your employees. You'll also submit your culture audit and brief to our assessment team, and Anthony will speak into that shortly. We do recommend that culture audit and brief is submitted around the same time as the survey is live, kind of the first or second week of the survey. That helps momentum on your end, and it also helps us to turn around the assessment and findings for you quicker. The subsequent step then is for our team to come to you guys and present the organization findings. We have a few benchmarks throughout that report, and we give a bit of context as to what your results mean. After all that, if you met the thresholds, you'll be in consideration for a range of certification opportunities. So we have our certification program, and we also have our Best Workplaces program. Just to cover specifically the Best Workplaces program, that's recognized in late February every year. And just to give an overview before we get into things of the weighting of that Best Workplaces list. 75% is given to the results we see in the Trust Index employee survey, and 25% is in your culture audit submission. The real aim of this is obviously to emphasize the employee voice and employee ownership of the program. And that employee experience is critical to developing great and best workplaces. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to my colleague, Anthony, who's going to talk you through the culture audit process and the new model.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joe. I really appreciate it. So look, I'm conscious we have a real big mix on the call today. We have some who are very new to the process, some who've been with us for a long time, and some we hope will be with us very soon. So really, I'll kind of try and meet everybody where they are. And I'll run through some questions. I'll give an overview of what the culture audit is. I'll point out where resources can be found. The first thing to understand here is that the culture audit is this open-ended document where you give us written responses to some long-form questions. Now, that will be familiar to many of you. However, quite a bit has changed here, and we'll run through those changes very quickly. So any of you who've been with us before will notice a few things about this culture audit in comparison to previous years. It's a lot shorter. There's now 5 mandatory questions, so less barriers to participation, less resource intensive. By that logic, the scope of the question set is less exhaustive, so you don't need to tell us everything. You have freedom to tell us what you excel in, and that will start to become clear to you where that applies as we roll along. Now, there's some uniformity across entries. What I mean by that is there's word limits for each question. So each participant, each respondent here is on a level playing field. You have the same amount of space to tell us what's going on. And of course, there is more guidance here. So What I mean by that is that the question set document itself contains some useful click-through links, but also we're doing things like this webinar and the initial rollout webinar. So what you'll see here on the left there is myself rubbing shoulders with the CEO. Yes, yes. So what we've got here is a video that gives you a long form explanation of the questions we're about to cover here. And that can be found on our Great Place to Work Ireland YouTube channel. And there's a lot more resources there. There's a lot of videos you can explore, but for our purposes here, your first point of contact for these question sets is that Culture Audit Rollout video. You can find that through this link up here. You can also find it on our methodology page, and you'll be sent it with the question set documents. Okay, so as I said to you there, we're going to get into an overview of what these questions are. And keep in mind that I'll give you the abridged version here of what I've discussed in that previous webinar. So if you're very new to the process and you feel as though perhaps you're missing some context, perhaps I'm throwing you in at the deep end, really just be patient with me here. There's way more information available in those other kind of resources I talked about. But for now, we'll get into it. So question 1, trust. What key qualities make your organization a great place to work? How do you create this unique environment? Why do you do it? So what, how, why? So really here, this is your opportunity to tell us what you excel in. What do you do well? So let's say, for example, you want to tell us you're an organization committed to development. Well, then, of course, you'll give us a selection of your programs, practices, policies that support that. And crucially, tell us why this is occurring. So naturally, it's quite intuitive. We know that it's good to have developing employees, but what we want to hear is the organization, their perspective of why it's important. Okay, so question 2, maximizing human potential. How do you ensure everyone, regardless of who they are or what job they do, is a full member of your organization and can reach their highest potential? So look, we can see by the contents of this question that we're talking about things like D&I related policies and practices, and they're very suitable here, but also things like development. So really, this is a question of resources. There's a lot of things that occur in a company: communication, rewards, development, and we want to see that these resources are being shared relatively evenly across the company. Is everyone being offered a chance to participate in meetings? Values, very straightforward. What are your values? And 3 examples of how you've put them into practice. So where we tend to see these examples put into practice, and again, these are just examples for you to help you make sense of this question, are things like peer-to-peer recognition as an interview methodology, perhaps in terms of leadership development and decision-making. So relatively straightforward there. Leadership effectiveness. What is your strategy and philosophy for ensuring a successful business? How are strategy, business direction, and goals developed and communicated across the organization? So really, you tell us what your strategy is, but we're not assessing your strategy. The crux of this assessment is how people are brought into the fold. So how are people informed of what's going on, and how can they answer questions of what's going on? So how can people engage with the strategy? Okay. Innovation by all, mandatory question number 5. How does your organization involve employees in developing new ideas and better ways of doing things that result in real improvements to your business performance? Okay, now what I'm telling you to think about here, more so than the word innovation, which may not apply to everybody if we think about that in terms of the semantic meaning of that, what we're talking about here is ideas and suggestions. So how can people put their hand up or write in or any format they can to make suggestions, and how are these encouraged, received, responded to? Okay, so again, this is a quick overview of these questions. There's way more guidance available in that kind of overview video and within the document itself. So understanding that some of you are quite new to the process, and it might be advantageous to many of you who've been with us for a long time as well, here's what the culture audit process looks like. You'll receive the documents, the question set, just a Word document, upon completion of sign-up or renewal form. The client services team will send you out that video I referenced, and you should watch that to give you a really good overview of what it entails. So then think about the question set. What information do you feel you will need for your response? So maybe if we think about question 1, trust here for a moment, and we're asking you, what are the key qualities? Well, you may get a sense of what those key qualities are, and you'll want to ensure you have access to that required information. And a really useful way to do that, and it won't be the case for everybody, some will be sole authors, a useful way to do this is to set up a team within your company of people who know these kind of areas well. So somebody who understands communication very well, development really well, maybe rewards practices. Okay, so you arrange a timeline for submission with our client services team. And as Joe mentioned there, that should be at the close of the survey. You complete the culture brief form, which accompanies the culture audit form. And within that culture audit, you utilize the guidance links. I promise you, these are very helpful. When completed, and I know that one step, there's a lot of work in that, and we'll get to that. That's okay, that's why we're here. So once completed, you submit that in a Word doc or PDF to this address below. Okay, so luckily, I have met quite a few of you on the call here already. Some of you I hope to get to meet as we move along, but I've been engaging with people as they work towards their submission dates. And I've gotten a lot of questions from clients, and they tend to be following similar patterns. So we'll look here into the type of questions we get, and we'll look to address them here. What I'll say is, of course, if you have more questions, if we don't address it in full, pop a message into the chat or the Q&A, or if you feel like it's kind of requires a more personalized response, a more expansive time, perhaps with yourself and your team, just get in touch with me. We'll set that up too. Okay, so you're sitting down, you're preparing to work on the audit. These are the type of questions that tend to occur. And I've started with a question I don't have a direct answer for. Not a sign of things to come, but this is a common question. So how long does it take to complete the audit? If you've been with us before, I can assure you that it takes significantly less time than the previous audit. I can't tell you how long it will take you specifically, but what I will tell you is if you have somebody working on the audit with you, that'll speed things up. Okay, so what are the word counts for each question? So there are word counts in the questions, and we discussed this in terms of the changes. So as a general rule, the word count is 4,000 words for each question, apart from question 3, the values question, and that's 2,000 words. So 4,000 for everyone, apart from values, and that's half of that. Okay, so what is the difference between the culture brief and the culture audit? No problem. The culture brief is a document that asks you for, it's an Excel document, and it asks you for your employee demographic numbers. So that's more of in terms of who's in the company. Now that accompanies the culture audit, and the culture audit is this sprawling, open-ended kind of essay question. So the culture brief isn't accessible, but it provides the context for the culture audit. Okay, we'll move on. So what to include? What do you include? And these are the questions we've been getting from clients wondering about, is it right to include this or that? So should we only include activities from the last 12 months? So what people are wondering here is, should this just be within the last calendar year? Perhaps this is because they've participated with us last year. What I'll say to you is, most of what you tell us will be recurring, consistent practices. This will give us an idea of what your culture is like, generally, what it's usually like. Now, you may find it's the case that you want to tell us something beyond that time frame, such as maybe you have a 5-year strategy that was rolled out 3 years ago. Well, then of course you'll want to tell us that, and that's outside of that 12-month window. Maybe you want to tell us about an innovation or an idea that has been implemented a few years ago, and it's quite poignant to you how you work. Of course, include that. But the majority of what you tell us will be recurring, consistent, established practices. Okay. So can you include links to microsites or external sources? So not particularly. So what I'll tell you is, because of that relevant word count for each, and the idea that this is intended to be fairer, what we're asking is for whatever you want assessed within a particular question, put it within that 4,000 word count. So if you say that you want us to see something in a microsite external source, if you want whatever you want assessed from that, put a summary of it above that. I will watch what you present to me, but I can only assess what is actually included in that. Okay. So should we include pictures? Some of you love to include pictures. This is not a matter of should, it's a matter of can. And you absolutely can include pictures wherever you feel it's necessary. What I will say is I want to avoid a situation where you take a lot of time out of your day looking for this perfect picture, because I don't have a way to reward that per se. There are no style points here. So it's really at your discretion. So this one is for previous participants only. You've submitted a culture audit before. Do you need to start from scratch? Now, with everything that's happened this year, we know people's resources, we know people's schedules. And this is somebody ideally who submitted an audit last year or perhaps the year previous, the full response to the audit. So what I will say is, you may find that, and we'll return to that key qualities question again, that if you tell us something like development is very important to you, that you can return to last year's submission and take much of that information and use it to guide your response. And you could see how that could apply in things like the values question, the leadership effectiveness question in terms of strategy. So you can absolutely use your previous response, if you're stuck for time, to inform this response. It may benefit you to start from scratch, but it won't be a major issue if you don't. If that information is still pertinent, feel free. So hopefully that's alleviated some concerns for some there. So we're getting into questions in terms of your writing, you're on the move, you're getting these kind of things on paper, and you're wondering, are you on the right track? So this is one I've gotten quite a bit, and the answer is, it's up to you. But should we present supporting data or metrics, graphs, or just figures? So if you want to tell us something about progression rates, perhaps engagement rates, how should you convey that to us? Whatever suits you best, as long as I can interpret the data, that's fine. You're concerned about repetition of content across questions. Is that okay? So the context here is usually somebody says that one of the key qualities that make us a great place to work is that we're a values-led organization. And then they look a little bit down, they see there's a value-specific question there. So should we leave it for that? Absolutely not. Each question is assessed individually through individual metrics. So everything you want assessed under the heading of a particular question, you should include under that question. That's a double-edged sword, of course it is, but you can represent yourself as best you can repeatedly through those 5 questions if pertinent. So it's at discretion. Now, I'm going to take a very quick drink. My apologies. It hits are delicious. So we're getting into 2 questions here now, which are specific to individual items in the question set. We'll use a visual aid to help us answer these questions, but we'll get to them here. So we are a large MNC with a global strategy. How should we approach the leadership effectiveness question? That's question 4. And you're not sure any of your programs count as innovation specific. How should we approach this? And that's question 5. So we'll get into that. So if we're looking at question 1, leadership effectiveness, and you remember this concern here is that the strategy comes from global, but the question very much asks you how these things are developed. But if your strategy comes from global, just tell us that. We want the actual state of affairs on the ground as it is. So you might not be able to tell us about its development at length, but what you should do then is focus on the strategy in terms of communication at the local level. So you can discuss who provides this kind of information and how they do it. And at a very wide scale, from very wide scale retailers, large employee numbers, this may not always be verbal. This may be written, it may be posters, newsletters. So really, to summarize that, just give us the current state for you. Now, innovation by all. And if we remember, the question here is none of the programs seem to be innovation specific. And that's very much kind of suggested here by the name of this question. But what I'll say is, let's not get stuck in the word innovation. So when I'm assessing this, what I'm telling you is think more in terms of the things of upward communication of ideas and suggestions if you don't have that kind of specific innovation program. So really what we're just talking about here is upward communication of ideas. Now you should discuss how they're encouraged, rewarded, and responded to. And then thinking a little bit further down in terms of improvements, these can relate to things like culture and processes, not necessarily product offerings coming from your R&D department. So it may be the case that somebody has suggested different wastage procedures. Maybe it's a social kind of thing. Whatever it is, this gives us an indication that ideas are encouraged and responded to. Okay, so we're talking about weighting and assessment here. You're moving towards the end, you're wondering how it's going to be interpreted. Has the score weighting changed this year? It has. It's 75% for the survey, 25% for the culture audit, and that used to be a 2/3, 1/3 split. Can I tell you what the assessment criteria are? So no, I can't tell you exactly what metrics I'll assess it through. I kind of mentioned earlier that they're individualized for each question. What I did also tell you is that there are click-through links on the question set document. And if you follow those, they will give you a very, very good indication of what we'll be looking for here. So, you know, you can read between the lines on that, but that's what I'm telling you is to really utilize that resource. What happens if we don't answer the optional question? Yes, there's an optional question. And that optional question is, what bold active leadership has your organization taken to improve the root conditions necessary to create great workplaces for all in your organization or the community at large? Where is the comma in that sentence? It certainly should be there. So what are the repercussions for not answering this question? What I'll tell you is the extra credit that can be awarded for the highest level response to this question is negligible. It will not make or break whether you are recognized. So I would tell you that work with this question. You'll see there is still guidance for this question in the click-through link. If it applies to you, if you feel like you have a meaningful response, please answer. If you don't fret. Just answer the 5 mandatory questions. Right. So we've gone through that kind of Q&A aspect, and hopefully we've gotten to kind of some of the things you need to know. And again, I'd urge you to pop any remaining questions in the Q&A or get in touch with me if you need a more expansive response. And we're getting into this kind of area where I've worked with some assessments already, and we've really got a good sense of what the difference between, and they're all going to be good, what the difference between a good response and an exceptional response is, okay? So here's what I'm saying. 2 areas. An exceptional response is where the organization's unique approach is clear and the content includes examples and evidence. So what do I mean by that? When we're talking about the unique approach being clear, we are given the rationale behind programs and initiatives. And this also applies to something like question 2, where you are discussing the efforts to include as many as possible in your programs. Why is this occurring? How activities are linked to the overall success of the company is discussed. Again, we talk about something like development, and this also offers the why. You have a development program in place. Why is that important? Why is it important people kind of develop in a particular way? Why is any of what you do important? And is there an overarching framework that guides these decisions? So you might also want to represent what is unique about the culture. Why would somebody choose you over a competitor? What I'm telling you is don't be modest, okay? We all do wonderful things at the organizational level. It is absolutely beneficial to you to highlight areas where you excel over your competitors. Now, when we're saying the content includes examples and evidence, this is somewhat self-evident, no pun intended. But what we're saying is, where possible, evidence is provided to indicate the efficacy of your program. So rather than just telling us you have leadership development, tell us how many are involved in the program and how many have progressed. Rather than just telling us you have a strong track record of working with survey feedback, give us examples of what that looks like. And if you don't have hard evidence or metrics, tell us more about the qualitative impact. And that could be something like quotes or responses to emails, anonymized, if you will, that people have shown their appreciation, the impact of the programs. So look, that's about it from me. And of course, you can put your questions in the Q&A, but we're going to hand over to Joe now. And Joe is going to walk you through the survey process.
Thanks for that, Anthony. A very accessible and thorough explanation, as always. I know some people can get a bit intimidated when they see the word audit, and you've made it clear that it's a very straightforward procedure. And also, if anyone has any additional questions, they can certainly check in with the helping hand. So my aim here today is to really give an outline of the other stream of the program, which is the survey process. What we'll do here is cover the basics. So for those of you that are maybe thinking of kicking off your Great Place to Work journey, this should outline what it will look like. But also for those of you that have maybe been with us for a couple of years, maybe even built up some bad habits in that time, this will show you from a back to basics approach what it actually looks like beginning to end when you're approaching your Great Place to Work survey. So the first step when kicking off your Great Place to Work survey is you'll be assigned a program manager, one of these lovely friendly faces. You've got my colleague Claire, who oversees the client services team, Evelyn, and myself. These people will be your main point of contact throughout the program. They'll be your first port of call if you have any questions, if you need any clarification on anything. And really the main thing we always emphasize when speaking to organizations that are kicking off the journey is we're not here to catch you out. We're here to support you. So if you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. There is no such thing as a stupid question. There's no such thing as an obvious question. It's really critical that you have the support and knowledge you need. So please do come to us if you ever need to clarify anything. So the first thing your program manager will do as we move on to the next slide is build a timeline with you. In my experience, there are three main approaches when it comes to sort of formulating the timeline that you'd like to roll out. The first one is there any event upcoming in your organization that you would like to tie the specific survey launch to? So for example, back in the day when we were actually allowed to be in the same place as each other, some organizations might tie it to an all hands meeting and say, we're going to launch it the same day as our all hands meeting. So that could maybe serve as a reason to have a survey on a specific launch date. The other thing that might help build out a timeline is, do you need to have the findings and the results in hand by a specific date? Maybe you want to have, what your employees have said in your report in time to build out a strategy for 2022. And it's critical that you have those findings in hand by a specific date. Based on that, we can work backwards and say, okay, we should launch the survey at this time. Or otherwise, when would you like to activate your certification? You can be certified in as little as 6 weeks if you were to kick off today, and you might have something coming up, maybe a company anniversary or something else that you really want to celebrate with a certification. And based on that, again, we can cascade dates backwards from that date. So as we move on, once a date is agreed, you're going to want to communicate that internally. We provide co-branded posters that will be branded with your logo and ours. We'll also put your organization name and the survey dates on it. This just kind of helps sell the fact that it is really a partnership. We're there to support you, and the employees know that the survey is coming up on a specific date and that it doesn't just sort of land in their inbox without any fanfare. So there are a couple of things you're going to want to consider as you build this internal communication. The first thing that we're going to look at as we move on to the next section is that you're going to want to keep the communications in an authentic organization voice. We do provide guidance, we do provide suggested content, but we don't tell you what to say because we don't want to kind of cover over your voice. It's really important for it to be seen as an authentic internal initiative in your organization. The next thing that you're going to want to look at is letting your employees know your reasons for taking part. Let them know that it's something that's really important to the organization, and explain that you really want them to come along with you on that journey. And the next part of that is emphasizing that they also have ownership for the process. Creating a great workplace is every employee's responsibility from the bottom to the top. Make sure they're bought in, make sure they know they can get involved if they'd like to, and effectively make sure they know that this is their process too, rather than something coming down from above. Your program manager will be able to provide you with some sample communication materials, but we can also review your communications to make sure you're on message. We're not leaving you adrift when we tell you to do it in your own voice. We will review that if you need to have it checked, and we can also make sure that what you're saying is on message, that you're not, cutting across any guidelines or anything like that. So as we come towards the survey launch date, we would recommend that you issue an email from either your CEO or a senior leader in the organization. And this shows that the organization is fully bought in, top to bottom, that it's really important at every level. And actually, we find that subsequently, organizations that do this have a significant impact on engagement and response rates with the survey. The other thing we're going to want to do in advance of survey launch is a quick IT test. And we want to cover this off about 2 weeks in advance of launch. You'll connect us with someone on your end who oversees your IT system. And there's 3 main things we want to look for out of this. One is that the survey is actually arriving in your inboxes rather than being routed to junk or spam. The second is that the survey link itself is accessible, because sometimes there might be intranet restrictions around domains or anything like that. So we need to make sure the domain is whitelisted. And the third thing is that there's no issues with the bulk email coming through the system, because our system issues all invitations at once on launch day. So you don't want your system going, it's 500 emails coming in, shut it all down. As we know, cybersecurity is a massive concern at the moment, and it's really important we cover this up ahead of time. Now, in my experience, I would say kind of 19 out of 20 times, it's a tick box exercise. The person on the other end signs off, it's done in about half an hour. But for that other 5% of times, it's really, really critical that we get this covered well in advance of launch, because you don't want to be pressing up against your launch date with this still unresolved. So as we move on to the next slide, take a quick sip.
Thirsty work.
So 1 week in advance of launch, we're going to ask for your employee template to be submitted to us. The employee template is effectively an Excel spreadsheet that you will use to populate your employee data. You'll populate it with stuff like their name, their email address, their department, and subsequent filters that may be relevant for your organization. There's a few key things to keep in mind when you're populating your employee template. The first thing is, wherever possible, group employees together into sets of 5 at a minimum. We can't provide any reports or any responses for groupings of fewer than 5 people. So just as an example, if you had a learning team that had 3 people on it and a development team that had 3 people on it, it would make sense to group those into learning and development, which had 6 people in it, and we can provide you with response rates on that basis. So look for those sort of affinities throughout the organization for those smaller sets. It may be a case that for really small sets, you just roll them all up into an other grouping, and you can see what the response rates are for other. We don't want, for example, sometimes I see organizations submit an email template and it might have something like the intake date of that specific employee. That's only really useful if you're doing group intake that might have 20 or 30 people in them. If each person started on a different date, we don't need intake date because it's going to be irrelevant from the data perspective. The other thing that you're going to want to do on this when you're completing the template is use organization data rather than personal data. You don't need to tell us if the employee is male or female. You don't need to tell us their age or their tenure. Our survey has standard demographics at the end of the survey. Instead, think of things from an organization perspective. If you were mapping out an org chart, what are the main ways you would slice and dice the organization? You're going to consider department, business unit, maybe the location. If there's different teams, if you can roll groups into at least a minimum of 5 people, you might use team leader as a filter, because then you can give those team leaders their response rates and their reports while the survey is live. So that's the type of thing you want to keep in mind when populating this template. The other thing to keep in mind is that we will ask you, the one exception to the personal data and the demographics in the survey is we actually ask you to provide us with a job level filter. This can be usually 3 or 4 levels. We do ask it in the survey, but we found over the years that people have a tendency to give themselves a promotion or a demotion, and then suddenly you might be looking at a data set that says there's 20 senior managers and we know there's only 15, and questions can raise for that. So it's more accurate if you provide us with the job levels in advance, and that means when we come provide the findings to you, you have accuracy over those job levels. The other thing we would ask is, and it's really critical, is that you identify in the filters the country the employee is based in. If you have any employees based outside of Ireland, it's really important you let us know what country that employee is based in. Part of the reason for it is when it comes to our recognition programs, obviously we can only recognize employees based in Ireland because it's the best workplaces in Ireland approach. So we need to be able to identify that set. Now we can still include employees in different countries because you may want to look at your organization as a whole, but we still need to be able to identify those employees based outside of the country if necessary. Okay, as we move on. So the critical thing really when you're coming to this is think of it from 2 perspectives. What response rates will be useful for you while the survey is live? As I've said, maybe a team leader response rate so that you can cascade that down to team leader level. And likewise, what results are useful? Strategically, what are you looking to analyze from the program? At the far end, the template will be the basis for us slicing and dicing the data. So 2 main things to keep in mind here. As I said at the beginning, our threshold is minimum sets of 5 people. When it comes to response rates, we need 5 people in a set to provide response rates. To go to my earlier example, if you grouped learning and development into 6 people, we'd be able to tell you while the survey is live, 4 of those 6 have responded. However, at the latter end of the survey, we need a minimum of 5 responses to provide results. So for that learning and developing grouping, if you had 6 people with 4 responses, we wouldn't actually be able to provide results for that set. So those are the things to keep in mind. It also, I suppose, provides some confidence and assurance around how we handle confidentiality around the program. Employees, we won't be able to drill down so granular that an individual results will be identifiable. So now, just for purposes of demonstration, I'm going to bring up a sample template just to show you what a completed one will look like. Now for this one, I've capped it at 5 filters, but you can actually extend those columns for as many filters as are relevant for your organization. As I receive this, obviously stuff like company name, respondent, and email address are straightforward. First thing that stands out at me when I look at the department column is you've got 3 people in sales and 3 in marketing. It would make more sense to bulk those together into sales and marketing. We look at our filter 1, that's got the job level filter in there, and actually filters 2 and 3 look into location, both drilling down into city and country, as I mentioned previously. So looking at this template, while the survey is live, you might be able to let the green team know their response rates are lower than the red team. You might be able to let the day shift know maybe it's going a bit up ahead of the night shift, and you might want to focus your attention on getting the night shift engaged. Likewise, when the survey ends, we'll be able to tell you if there's a massive difference in employee experience between those day shift and night shift. But again, populate this with information that's relevant to your organization, and that when we provide the results to you, that will make sense to you when you look at the findings. Okay, as we move on to the next slide. So, launch day FAQs. What time of day should we go live? This is something that often gets asked. So most organizations typically would default to a Monday morning at 9 a.m. That's obviously just a natural kickoff for the week. We can actually facilitate whatever works for you. So you might want to, as I said previously, pair launch to an internal event that's going on. We can even schedule surveys to go live outside of business hours if necessary. Some organizations may be fine, particularly during months where there's high levels of annual leave, but actually launching on, say, a Wednesday is useful because then you can cut across 3 calendar weeks. Keep up people on the other side. But the other query, how long does the survey take to arrive? So in most occasions, the survey comes through instantaneously, but we do have dedicated servers, but sometimes there can be a queue on those servers. So it's best to think of your launch slot as an hour window. It would typically come through in the 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. window. As I said, usually it's instantaneous. What email address does the survey come from? The email address is sent individually to each employee from ie_survey@greatplacetowork.com. Because they're receiving a unique invitation, employees may have a concern, as I said previously, around confidentiality and anonymity around the survey, because they might go, this has come through to me directly, you can identify my results. The bottom of the email invitation will have a little line in it saying that they can contact the program manager directly, and they can contact myself or Claire, or even if they have any concerns. It pops up rarely, but occasionally there might be 1 or 2 emails I get a year about it, and we would happily talk through any employee that has concerns about how we manage data and ensure that their responses aren't identifiable. The other thing around this is it's really important, since each employee receives a unique invitation, that they don't share their invitation with another colleague. So if another colleague hasn't received an invitation, they should either come back to your internal point of contact and escalate it to us, or contact us directly. Because if an employee from operations shares their response or shares their invitation with an employee in HR, then their responses are going to be allocated to the wrong area. So what if an employee has a concern about the survey? As I mentioned previously, our email address is at the bottom of the invitation email, so they have a direct line to us if they have any concerns around that, and we'll happily address it. And then finally, how long does the survey take to complete? Look, it's a how long is a piece of string situation, but most participants will finish it in under 10 minutes. Vast majority will come in under that. The only thing that would maybe delay that is there's 2 questions at the end that are open-ended that allows them to give us their feedback in their own voice, essentially what's positive about the organization and what they'd like to change. And really, how much time they want to spend on those questions will determine how long the survey takes to complete. So as we move on, while the survey is live, there's a few things you want to consider. The first is that you can use your response rate portal to monitor engagement. So any filters you provide us on the employee template will be broken down in the response rate portal, and you'll be able to see response rates from the different groupings, the different teams, the different locations, whatever else is in there. Some organizations find it useful then to cascade that to the most effective level, send it to either a team manager or a team leader to really drive engagement at that local level. Sometimes it can also be useful if you had, say, let's say 2 different locations, a Galway office and a Dublin office, and the Dublin office is at around 80% response rate. The Galway office might be flagging at about 40 to 50. You might let the Galway office know you don't want the Dublin office to have an outside voice in this. Make sure you also have equal representation. Let us know your experience as well. The other thing you're going to want to keep in mind is that we issue 1 batch of targeted reminders after the first week has passed. We issue that to anyone who hasn't completed the survey after the first week. We find that 1 batch is sufficient. We don't want to be spamming your employees. We don't want to be constantly landing in their inbox. But the expectation would be that while the survey is live, you're also organically having those conversations internally and letting employees know that the survey is live. Now, if you have whatever internal reason might be necessary, and we feel that we need a second batch of reminders just to drive engagement a little bit more, we'll happily facilitate that in consultation with your program manager. But just 1 batch of reminders is typically standard. So the 2-week window is what we usually go for, as I would say. It's actually really, rather than just 2 weeks, it's kind of 15 days, because if we were to launch on a Monday at, say, Monday the 1st at 9 a.m., the survey would actually run to Monday the 15th at midnight. So it's 2 weeks and a day. If we're getting towards the end of that window, again, that can be extended in consultation with your program manager. If something unexpected pops up internally, say if restrictions were to come back in around COVID, if there's anything that really we felt might have been a reasonable reason to kind of prevent engagement with the survey, we'll happily facilitate an extension if necessary. Sometimes it pops up, is there a minimum response rate required? Look, I'm not going to get too deep into this. What I will say in short is that there isn't a specific response rate. We won't say you need to hit X% across the board, but there is a back-end calculation where a certain confidence level needs to be hit for the data sample. So effectively, we need to get within a certain margin of error, something similar to political polling, and that actually changes based on the size of the organization. So again, discuss it with your program manager, and we'll let you know what you need to get to hit that threshold. But it isn't a challenge for most organizations, so it's not something to worry about. So as we move forward, as you'll see from that bottom banner, I skipped over culture audit and brief because it was so thoroughly covered by Anthony. We move on to the post-survey stage. After the survey, we'll move on to a feedback session. This typically takes place around 3 weeks after the survey and submission, but obviously it's subject to demands on the calendar on our end and also demands on the calendar on your end. It's obviously getting the senior team together can be tricky sometimes. So we would slot in a 60-minute session with your senior team to go through the findings. This can be delivered, as we'll see on the next point, in person or virtually, either subject to national restrictions or even local or site restrictions at the time. Our consultants who have delivered the session, they're happy to facilitate what works for your team. So we can have a chat when we're booking that in, and that can be delivered, as I said, in person or virtually. We don't share the results in advance of this session, so it's really important to get the date booked in quite soon after the survey closes, so we can begin reviewing the findings. You don't want those results sort of start getting stale. It's really important to action those as soon as you can. The session itself, as we see on the next point, it covers survey results. We go through each statement. We look at kind of the different experience between job roles and maybe between departments or some of the other filters. We'll also provide some internal and external benchmarks to give context around those. So we'll show you where you stand, maybe in relation to your size category or sector or whatever else is relevant. For those organizations that have been with us for repeat years, we'll be able to show you trending over those previous years as well in certain areas. We'll use the open-ended employee comments to bring life to those findings. And then we'll open up a discussion about how the findings can actually support the organization's wider strategic goals. So once that session has taken place, we would recommend that you take time to review the findings. And then it's really critical that you build an internal plan to cascade the communications to the wider employees who've taken the time to give you your feedback. And it's really important then to keep them bought in and build that positive feedback loop to ensure they're engaged in future years. They know the survey is coming at a certain time of the year. They're ready for it. They're ready to give you their feedback because they know you will make changes on that basis. So after all that, we get to the final stage, which is recognition. You've completed your survey. Alongside the culture brief, that means you can be certified. We can certify you immediately for a 12-month period throughout the year. We do rolling certification. So basically, immediately once these 2 areas are in place and the minimum thresholds are met, we'll be able to activate your certification. We'll pass on your details to our marketing team, and Marina will liaise with you, giving you whatever assets you need, and also activating that certification across our social channels and really promoting your recognition. The culture audit submission feeds into our best workplaces assessment. The best workplaces list is announced in late February every year, kind of towards the end of Q1 effectively. And throughout January, we'll be communicating with those organizations that will be recognized as best workplaces and letting them know that they've made it and inviting them to hopefully in-person award ceremony in 2022. Participation in Best Workplaces also auto-enrolled you in our Best Workplaces for Women and Best Workplaces in Tech recognition programs. And then also that rolls up into the Best Workplaces in Europe program, which takes place every year as well. So assuming all thresholds are met, we'll be recognizing you. So it's not too late to be considered for the Best Workplaces in Ireland 2022 program. Do get in touch with us today so we can kick that off. As you see, there are a few deliverables in place. But if you were to start the conversation with us now, you could be certified in as few as 6 weeks, and fingers crossed to recognize on that Best Workplaces in 2022 list very, very soon. So I'll hand back over to Anthony, and hopefully we have some Q&A to address for you.
Thanks very much, Joe. And just for everybody in the call, I mean, you can hear how knowledgeable Joe is there. That is the case for everyone in our client services team and everyone in the company. We are here to help you throughout the entire process. So as Joe discussed, please don't be afraid to get in touch with us. Okay, so look, we'll get into the chat. There's a lot of good mornings here. That's lovely. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Okay, well, that's Marina. Sorry, no, I didn't practice this bit. My apologies. Okay, this is from Avril. Hi, Avril. Should we be aiming to hit max word count? Could shorter answers affect our score? That, Avril, it's right. So we're talking about quality and quantity here, not to use a cliche, but I have seen very strong responses not hit the maximum. And, I've seen responses that could have been stronger, hit the maximum word count. So I haven't seen this very direct relationship there. But what I will say is if you're kind of at about 500-600 words for the first question, what key qualities, you might want to think about fleshing that out a little bit more. There's probably a lot more going on in there. What I don't want you to feel like is, say you're at 3,200 words and you're going, I need to flesh this out more. So impactful information is really what we're talking about here. Now, hopefully I've got your question. And actually, if you want to have a chat about this afterwards, or if you want a kind of an individual call, you just get in touch with me there. I think that's it. That's all the questions we've got there. Oh, there's one in the Q&A now.
I see something in here, Anthony, just asking, is there a cutoff point for including employees in the survey? So typically it isn't a rule, it's more guidance. We do recommend a cutoff of roughly around 3 months before survey launch. However, different organizations have different onboarding experiences. Some organizations, you might have quite an intense experience, and within sort of 2 or 3 weeks of being involved in the organization, you get the culture and you're ready to go. In those cases, you might want to include those employees. Other ones, it's a bit more of a slow burn. So you might, think about not including those employees. Typically, what we would recommend is think about whose perspective it is that you want to capture. And also, if employees just miss that cutoff or aren't being included this year, do make sure to communicate with them why they aren't being included and that you'll be looking for their feedback in future years.
Thanks, Joe. So we've got a question in here in the Q&A from Christina Fox. So on the survey responses, will they be shared with HR separately before sharing with senior management, or is it all rolled up in one? So the question again, on the survey responses, will they be shared with HR separately before sharing with senior management, or is it all rolled up in one? Joe?
So typically we wouldn't share the results with HR separately in advance. The results are first shared at that session, because obviously sometimes there can maybe be a bit of a lag between chatting to HR and chatting to senior management. And I suppose we really wanted the opportunity to present those results and give the wider context as well. However, just maybe a day or so in advance of the session, the consultant is generally happy to have maybe a quick sort of 5-10 minute call with HR and just give a bit of scene setting in advance of that session.
Excellent. Thank you. So it seems as though there are no more questions in, and we'll give perhaps a moment.
See something else in the chat asking about the cutoff for Best Workplaces 2022. So I can pick that up.
Yeah, I'm missing these, Joe. Thank you.
No, we're just popping through in the chat there rather than the Q&A. So the cutoff, we basically want to have the survey wrapped up and the culture audit submitted by sort of the second week of December. So really, we want to be launching the survey towards the end of November or first week of December and have that culture audit submission in hand no later than the second week of December. Our assessment for Best Workplaces takes place throughout January, so really it is our deadline to have those elements in place for them.
Absolutely. And if you want guidance around kind of completing your culture audit, the best time to get in touch for kind of a call is earlier. I will be of most assistance to you earlier in the year. It gets a little bit nutty here as we approach the D-Day in terms of the awards. Now, how are companies chosen for the best workplace in tech or women?
So I can speak into that. Effectively, if you're taking part in the Best Workplaces overall list, you're automatically enrolled into those programs. There is a methodology for Best Workplaces in Women focusing on the female experience in the workplace, and also some areas to do with practices around, promoting a positive experience for women in the workplace. We can provide that information. I can follow up with you directly on that, Avril, and give you that. For Best Workplaces in Tech, it's simply an auto enrollment based on Best Workplaces overall.
Okay, we got another one for you here, Joe, from Emily. Can you advise on the pricing for this?
So we can discuss that specifically on a one-to-one. Obviously, it changes based on the size of the organization, the level of engagement. You may be going for a cert directly, or you may look at our Best Workplaces list. You may want a certain level of consultancy within the organization as well, or help help you drill into certain areas. So it depends, it changes, but I know Brian or Fania or Carl or Jim will be happy to discuss that with you directly if you're in touch with one of us.
Okay, we got one more in the chat here. Again, can you give us an idea on costing? Transparency is key to gaining trust. Okay, Brian. Yeah. So I think again, kind of addressing that would be more, there would be baseline cost, but that would be very much on an individual basis. Joe, is that the case?
Yeah, effectively. I mean, it's every organization is different. So there isn't a set price for one organization. It depends on size and additional factors.
Okay. So I think we are coming towards the end of our session here, unless there's any more questions.
So Brian, I just see my colleague Brian has popped into the chat there and saying, just to give you a baseline, an average investment for a small organization is between 5,000 and 7,000. So I hope that helps to give you some transparency around that. Anthony, I see a question further back, which might be useful for you. Avril has asked, could you please go back to how we can include microsites in the culture audit? How is best to share screenshot visuals? Can we share video?
No, yeah. So again, this is within that 4,000 word or 2,000 word limit. Whatever is within there, the actual words within there will be assessed. So if it's a microsite, a video per se, I would put a summary of what you want to have assessed within that video. Okay, so the key points you want, I will watch it for context. I would put what is important to you from that within the main body of the 4,000 words. Yes. Okay.
I think that looks like it.
So, do we have one more?
So just our colleague Brian has given some more clarity in the chat. For anyone who isn't looking at the chat, just Brian had given some clarity around pricing, and I'll just outline. He's also said he's really happy to share pricing as all of who do engage do so at the same rate as that headcount and with one best workplaces are certified.
Okay, look, we'll wrap up now. That is a huge thank you to everybody for attending. A huge thank you to the team behind the scenes here, especially Marina, who keeps the gremlins away as we deliver on this. So, of course, if you have any more conversations, get in touch with me at any of these email addresses here, or our team, or the phone, if you're old school like that. I believe some people still use a phone. So thank you very much, everybody. And we are going to close off now. So a huge thanks to myself and Joseph.
Thanks for giving us your time, guys.
Thanks, folks. Thank you. Y'all take care now.